If you've watched my recent seasonal recap videos, I've mentioned in each one that I try out every new anime that airs each season. And I'm really not exaggerating when I say that. Unless it's a sequel to something I already dropped, a long-running kids show that's not Pokemon or a Magical Girl series, or it just doesn't have a subtitled version available, I will try it out if it appears on a seasonal chart. Now, of course, just because I try something doesn't mean that I'm going to finish it. In fact, I end up dropping far more shows than I complete because a lot of the stuff that airs each season is kinda bad. To the average anime fan who probably only watches a handful of shows a season, if that, this might seem a bit over the top and ultimately leads to the question of why? Why go through so much trouble? Why not just pick a bunch of shows that fit my tastes and hope that they're good? Why would I subject myself to so many terrible anime on the off chance that I find something that I might have skipped over? The answer, quite simply, is that I don't know what I'm going to like until I sit down and watch it. Yes, I do have certain genres and subject matters that I tend to gravitate towards, and I have particular directors and studios that I end up liking more than others, but a plot synopsis and staff list are not a surefire way of gauging what a show is actually going to be like. Maybe it has a particular set of tropes that I really like, but it executes those tropes in a manner that I find annoying. Or maybe it looks totally unassuming on the surface, but has a few overlooked specificities that really make it stand out. In the vast majority of cases, you just can't tell what an anime is going to be like until you sit down on the couch and start watching. And I've prepared a few examples to explain where I'm coming from. We'll begin with the show that started me down this path in the first place, way back in the spring of 2016. By this point, I had been watching seasonal anime for about 2.5 years and felt that I had started to solidify what my taste in anime was. I liked rom-coms and shonen action-adventure, was very hit and miss on melodramas, and generally disliked harems and laid-back slice-of-life stories. That last genre in particular I attacked with a ferocious zeal that might seem weird to current-day anime fans, but seeing as I had mostly been watching AniTubers that would frequently use the word moe shit with so much venom that you could kill a whole zodiac's worth of animals, hating slice of life was just a given for me at the time. In any case, the season was coming to a close, and I decided to ask the people in my immediate online orbit if there were any shows from the season I hadn't seen yet worth trying out. And someone responded with, "You should check out Sansha Sanyo." Then, a few days later, my favorite AniTuber at the time, Trixie, also recommended it in one of her many vlog posts. If you've been following my channel for a while, then you know that I was basically mainlining her content into my brain for the entire back half of the 2010s. An endorsement from her was about as good as it got, so I put my reservations about slice of life anime aside and gave it a go. And to my complete and utter surprise, I ended up loving it. It was a bit more comedy-forward than I was expecting, with each episode doling out barrelfuls of laughs as I realized that its central cast of cute girls was full of full-on fucking weirdos. Its knack for adding unexpected or flat-out bizarre twists to commonplace character tropes constantly caught me off guard and had me consistently bursting with laughter. I was also taken aback by the initial feeling of narrative conflict. Not in the sense of active combatants, but in how there was a very palpable tension as our lead character, Nishikawa, struggled to engage in natural conversation with her classmates. I was also intrigued by Nishikawa's extreme self-doubt and worry that her newfound friends would abandon her for being too weird or out of step with her public persona. An emotional struggle that I latched onto hard at the time and would go on to do an in-depth analysis of with a similar character in A Place Further Than the Universe, a show that I very well might not have watched if I still held my prior disdain for cute girls doing cute things. Narrative aside, it's also the show that cemented Doga Kobo as one of my favorite studios. By this point, my only experiences with them were Engaged to the Unidentified, which I had middling opinions on at the time due to my disinterest with the main cast, and Plastic Memories, which I liked quite a lot for its character drama, but whose visual artistry mostly went over my head because I just hadn't developed an eye for it yet. By the time I got to Sanshou Sanyo, however, I was blown away by how fluid and wacky this studio could get with its animation. It's a style that I've grown to love, and one that Doga Kobo would continue to indulge in with titles like New Game and Koisuru Asteroid, both of which are also slice-of-life titles I would have actively avoided if not for Sanshou Sanyo. Eventually, my interest in cute girls doing cute things titles with highly expressive animation would lead me to Yama no Susume, which I also made a video for as part of my final season of 12 Days of Anime. Even my love for Precure and its excellent approach to the struggles of mundane life may never have materialized if I hadn't given Sanshou Sanyo a shot. Now, you could probably argue that I would have eventually discovered all of this at some point, but who knows when that point might have been. I could have been stuck in the moe shit bad bunker for years if I just so happened to miss my favorite AniTuber talk about it, or if I hadn't asked people to recommend seasonals to try out at that particular moment. Considering that it very quickly fell out of the zeitgeist after it finished airing, it's possible that I simply would have never watched Sanshou Sanyo at all. And that really irked me. The notion that I could have missed out on something I loved so much was an eye-opening experience. And so, in what you could probably describe as a bit of an overreaction, I resolved to try out every new show that aired, beginning with the summer 2016 season. Conveniently, this was also my first summer break after graduating college, but before I got a job, meaning I had a ton of extra free time to watch more anime. This new strategy immediately yielded strong results with shows like Amanchu, Relife, New Game, and Sweetness and Lightning, all of which I had absolutely no interest in based on their premises, but ended up liking quite a lot. After that, the matter was settled. Every time a new season rolled around, I would give each new show a fair shake to see if it had what it took to surpass my expectations. At this point, however, I need to admit that I've been stretching the truth just a little bit. For a while, when I said that I tried out every new show, there was always a little asterisk attached to that statement. And that asterisk read, no adaptations of video games. In fact, this rule actually came about well before my try everything rule, because I had been burned by bottom barrel adaptations for so long. Though it's not necessarily the first one I tried and dropped, my first distinct memory of this is with Gunslinger Stratos, an anime I picked to watch solely because I thought the characters looked cool for some reason, and I immediately hated it with a violent passion after sitting through the first episode, thus beginning my long-running disdain towards video game anime. Whether it was the painfully slow and bland adaptation of an Atelier game, or the absolute front-to-back garbage that is Blade & Soul that I watched way too many episodes of for some fucking reason, I was convinced any adaptation of a video game that I hadn't already played, those being Pokemon and Halo, was going to be a waste of time because the vast majority of these anime seemed aimed at people who already played the games and just wanted to see their favorite characters in a purely narrative environment, rather than trying to adapt the story of the game in a way that would be beneficial to its new medium. Cutting video game anime from my seasonal lineup seemed like a pretty easy decision at that point. Fast forward all the way to 2022, and I finally ran headfirst into an anime that seemed purposefully designed to challenge me on this matter. That, of course, being Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Yes, I know now that Cyberpunk was a tabletop game first, but I didn't learn that until well after I finished the anime, and I thought it was based on the 2077 game, so for all intents and purposes, it fits the mold of being adapted from a video game based on my perceptions at the time. Also, it's not like TTRPG anime have an especially glowing reputation either. Not only was it being adapted by Trigger, one of my favorite studios, and directed by Hiroyuki Imaishi, one of my favorite directors, the synopsis also made it clear that it wasn't really adapting the story of Cyberpunk 2077, but rather telling a brand new story within that universe. Now, you could argue that the amount of buzz and hype that this title got surely would have drawn me in, but popularity is far from being an important factor in whether I watch something or not. I haven't had a chance to bring it up in any of my videos, but I am a well-known ReZero hater in my social media circles, so neither popularity nor critical acclaim are a guarantee that I'll like a given show. Had it not been filled to the brim with staff whose works I adore, I would have had no issues dismissing this show out of hand. And I probably don't have to tell you how huge of a mistake that would have been. Cyberpunk Edgerunners is one hell of a series. Gritty yet cartoonish, edgy and dark yet incredibly in tune with the complex emotions of its characters, a sprawling cyberpunk setting whose world building you could get lost in, with a story that never loses focus on its central themes and character arcs. You really don't get an anime like this every season. And while the ending was a little too bleak for my tastes, I can't deny it's an ending that stuck with me well after the show finished. If you're okay with dark shit and graphic content, then this show is a definite must-watch, and I can't wait for whatever new story Trigger has in store for the recently announced Season 2. And so, from then on, anime adaptations of video games were no longer banned from my seasonal binges. And while I have yet to finish one since then, I do believe that the possibility exists, and you're free to leave your own suggestions in the comments. Okay, so I'm not sure why it took me until I got to the video editing stage of this to remember that Uma Musume is also an adaptation of a video game, but yeah, that one totally counts and everything except Season 1 is awesome. Admittedly, it's also a very weird exception since the game didn't actually come out until after Season 2 premiered, but I can only assume they were working off of whatever video game material they had, so a win's a win as far as I'm concerned. Also, go watch Uma Musume. It's really fucking good. I made a whole video about it back when I worked for Anime News Network, so I'll link that in the description if you need some convincing as to why you should watch it. At the very least, it did get me to be a bit more open towards mixed media works. Projects in which an anime is created alongside other mediums, such as video games and manga, to form a cohesive media blitz for a single franchise. Eventually leading me to a series hardly anyone gave a shit about called Megaton Musashi, whose first season I absolutely adore for its raw melodrama and hype as fuck mecha action. So perhaps more straightforward adaptations of video games will yield similar results one day. Maybe that Ufotable Genshin anime will be one. Probably not, but I can at least give it a fair shot once it finally comes out. By this point, I had removed just about all the asterisks and exceptions from my try everything rule, and was well into making multiple episodes of what I called the seasonal wrap-up show on my side channel, Ember Unplugged. It's basically my knockoff version of Trixie's Finish or Fail series because I am nothing if not honest about my influences. If you are a regular viewer of the seasonal wrap-up show, you may have noticed a particular phenomenon in which I would occasionally bring out what I referred to as the Isekai bell. A desk bell that I would ring as a bit every time I tried out a new Isekai anime. Those of you who are even vaguely familiar with seasonal anime are probably aware of how immensely prevalent isekai titles have been for the past decade or so. Even as I speak, the season during which I'm making this video has brought us 6 different isekai titles, some being new IPs and some being sequels to previous entries that refuse to die for some fucking reason. Please, somebody free Kinema Citrus from the hell of perpetual Shield Hero sequels. Anyways, isekai is undoubtedly a hot commodity, and quite frankly, most of them are fucking terrible. When you reach this level of saturation this quickly, there's only so much that can be iterated on before it all grows stale and repetitive. It also doesn't help that a lot of these titles are incredibly ugly to boot. which is a direct result of production committees going out of their way to spin up as many new projects as possible, regardless of whether there are enough resources to give each series the polish it needs. I don't like picking on any one particular genre of anime, but every season it gets harder and harder to deny how much garbage there is in modern isekai. And at this point, I can't really blame anyone for just skipping over the titles that don't rise to the top of the seasonal charts. All that said, I'm still fully committed to giving every new show a chance to shine, and every year I come away with at least a couple unexpectedly good isekai. And I want to briefly touch on a few of my favorites to show you a whole spectrum of isekai you might be missing. The wrong way to use healing magic is, to me, the quintessential example of an isekai that looks incredibly skippable on the surface. The director, while experienced, doesn't have especially high name recognition. The studio is mostly known for Doraemon and 2 different rom-com franchises, so an action isekai seems like a bit of a stretch, and a work with healing in the title doesn't even make it stand out as a subgenre of fantasy anime, especially in a post-Redo of Healer environment. I would also like to apologize for having to mention Redo of Healer. You didn't deserve that. Despite all of this, the wrong way to use healing magic is a shockingly refreshing take on the isekai formula. The group of students who get isekai'd stay relatively friendly with each other instead of immediately becoming rivals or enemies. The main character has to work his ass off for months on end in order to get his fuck-off OP powers instead of just being gifted them naturally, and it managed to present a surprisingly intriguing magic system. While it's not a superbly animated project, it maintains a baseline level of competency throughout its run through a focus on eye-catching color work and well-constructed character designs. Even though I found the flashback segment to be mostly unnecessary and bloated, I walked away from this one pleasantly surprised and more than willing to come back whenever the second season comes around. Aside from the straightforward fantasy classes, many modern isekai have taken to attacking their new worlds from more unique angles. Handyman Saitou in Another World asks the question of how a handyman/odd jobs guy would perform in a fantasy setting, and the answer seems to be a combination of rogue and blacksmith. The fact that the anime starts in medias res rather than forcing us to see the isekaiing event right at the top, which has by far become my least favorite part of any isekai anime because of how samey it gets, was a huge plus since it jumped right into the action without skimping on necessary background info. Saitou as a character also proved incredibly compelling as someone who finally sees his skills being praised for what he believes they're worth, but rarely dips into the edgier serves them right version of this that I've also seen a dozen times and hated a dozen times. It's not an especially pretty series, but its narrative and the chemistry amongst the characters easily carried me through to the end. Not all isekai are combat-centric, however, with one of my favorites in the non-combat category being Parallel World Pharmacy, in which a medical researcher is reincarnated into a fantasy world that has medieval-level knowledge of medicine, thus giving our protagonist a clear path forward in terms of the challenges he needs to overcome. Not so that he can be the very bestest guy, but so that he can help those around him who are in need of medical attention. Falma is an incredibly compelling lead whose commitment to wellness and medical advancement, motivated by his tragic past, easily gets you on his side as he strives to bring modern health knowledge to this new world. It's not especially flashy with its animation, save for a few cuts here and there, but Dio Media is a studio I can always trust to have the fundamentals down pat so that the cinematography and editing can more effectively carry each scene. I think about this series way more than I expected to, even 3 years after it's finished, despite it barely even registering on my radar when the season was drawing to a close. There are so many other titles that I could mention to make my point here. Like, I didn't even get into the villainous isekais, or the girl boss lesbian isekais, or the plethora of non-isekai titles I ended up loving but would never have tried out based on my tastes, or even the technically not anime titles I've started grouping into my seasonal binges that I ended up loving, but at this point I'd just be repeating myself. Plus, I was really hoping this was going to be like 15 minutes max, but I've clearly blown well past that. My road towards becoming the crazy man who tries out everything was not without just cause, and I don't see any reason to stop now. Just last season, I had another unexpected finish with The Two Perfect Saint, which you can hear me talk about in more detail in my previous seasonal recap video, and it is undoubtedly something that even now I probably would have skipped over since the saint trope is not one that I'm particularly hot on. 9 years in, and I'm still being surprised by new titles every season. Even now, I can't quite say with 100% certainty what my tastes are, and I can assure you it's not for lack of thought or analysis. Perhaps that's a video that needs to get made soon, but I'll save that for a later date. As for now, it's about time for my 10th summer seasonal binge to begin, and I'm ready to dive right into it. Special thanks to Rorkton Joing, Chris Adilli, Ryan Johnson, Lou Nuxor, and all my other patrons for their generous support. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.